So, ladies and gentlemen, and other non binary folks, good evening. I'm Peter Lexievich, and this is the Live at 5 from Kyiv on this Thanksgiving Day. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody in the U.S. I made myself a very delicious dinner of roast squash, Brussels sprouts, chicken in gravy, a mushroom gravy, a nice mushroom gravy. And I had a very pleasant meal reminiscent of what you might see in the United States without the booze or the drunk uncle telling me that Donald Trump is the best thing that ever happened to America. Ugh. Anyway, today is the 23rd, I'm sorry, the 24th of November. It is day 638 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. And in the last 24 hours, we've seen Russian hardware losses resume their normal trajectory. You know, it's been slow, right? The weather has slowed things down, and we haven't seen the kind of losses this week until today that we're accustomed to. 22 tanks, 38 APVs, and a whopping 36 artillery pieces. Now, why has the attrition rate gone up the way that it has? It's gone up the way that it has because yesterday the Russians started attacking again. According to the folks around Mariinka, they defended themselves against multiple assaults from the Russians. In the last 30 days, they reported 150 assaults by the Russians. In Avdiivka, we saw the Russians on the move. You saw, I assume most of you saw that incredible story about the automated sniper nest. Just incredible use of the technology on the part of the Ukrainians. Just unbelievable and mercilessly effective. Mercilessly effective. And we saw the Ramstein contact group take place. And according to the Ukrainian MOD, there were 5 major announcements or key takeaways from the Ramstein group meeting. There is a new ground-based air defense coalition of 20 nations. Ukraine is a big country. We do not have the air defense here to cover the country. There is no Iron Dome in Ukraine. And so 20 partner nations have come together to try to make sure that Ukraine has the air defense it needs to get through this winter. We know that the Russians are planning on targeting the energy infrastructure of this nation as we go into winter. That's why Cheyenne asked me about the candles, I'm sure. But I've got candles and bottled water and extra blankets and a plan to seal off the kitchen, Cheyenne, and live in the kitchen. Where I have a gas stove, which should work even when the power is out, right? So that is coming. That is coming. There are going to be lives that don't happen because there's no electricity here. I'm pretty sure that that's a real thing. That was the first key takeaway. The world is coming together to protect Ukraine through this winter. The Netherlands announced a 2 billion euro package of aid, which we have covered on this channel, as well as the Germans announced a 1.3 billion euro aid package, which we've also covered on this channel. Estonia, who leads the IT coalition, pledged $500,000, right? So there's the cybersecurity threats that we need to counter, and that's an ongoing battle. And get this, Luxembourg again. Luxembourg has come through with 10 million euros, 10 million euros. So not quite $11 million, but 10 million euros for the IT coalition for cyber defense. Huge from Luxembourg. God bless Luxembourg. UK and Norway, as part of the maritime coalition, will support Black Sea security, ensuring that Ukrainian grain shipments can continue to flow and feed the world. And those were the 5 key takeaways from the Ramstein contact group meeting. In other military aid and good news, the Bulgarians are sending 100 BTRs. Now, these BTRs are Soviet era, right? So they were probably made in the 60s. But for just moving men around, right, they're a kind of light armored personnel carrier. For moving men around, they'll certainly come in handy. Lithuania has pledged a new arms package of 3 million rounds of small arms ammunition, remote detonation systems, and winter equipment, that all important winter equipment. North Macedonia completed the Ukrainian basic training. So cheers to North Macedonia. So according to the best information that I can find out there, it's true the Ukrainians don't have the pool of men to draw from that the Russians do. But it's important to remember that to date, the Ukrainians have prosecuted this war without a draft. There is no conscription in Ukraine. It's a completely volunteer army, just like in the US. And of course, that's where you get the best, most committed troops. That's how you see the results that we see, where there's an estimated 20-to-1 KIA ratio in Avdiivka right now, 20-to-1. Right now, the Ukrainians are getting nervous. They seem to be concerned about where they're considering a draft. They're concerned about where the next batch of men are coming from. But this is not a pressing issue. It's a long-term issue because we know right now that there are about 83,000 troops, Ukrainian conscripts, who are doing their basic training in NATO countries, in the UK, in Spain, in North Macedonia, Canada, the US, etc. And they'll finish that basic training and return to Ukraine, just as these guys in North Macedonia are doing, just about the time the F-16s get here, and hopefully the next round of ATACMS, right? Hopefully they're on the way. You'll notice we haven't heard much about ATACMS. So that says to me that we did not send many, that the estimate that was given of 20 was probably correct. Because on my ATACMS bingo card, we only got up to 12. And that was a little disappointing, I'll tell you. On the 14th of November, according to the British Ministry of Defense, the Russian government acknowledged the Wagner veterans as Russian veterans. And that means that they get pensions or death benefits or health insurance, follow-up care, prosthetic care, etc. But by acknowledging the Wagner forces as Russian veterans, the Kremlin has erased any veil, any kind of pretense that Wagner was not always and always will be an arm of the Russian government. And today, the Wagner forces that chose to stay have been subsumed into the National Guard. And so they have gone from insurrection to being the core troops that Putin is depending on to protect him should there be another insurrection, which is an amazing irony. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer, right? Poland has charged 16 individuals with espionage, and they have all confessed and pleaded guilty. The 16 are Russian nationals, Belarusian nationals, and sad to say, Ukrainian nationals that were all in the employ of the FSB. Their job in Poland was to track trains and shipments of goods, military aid, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. They had placed dozens and dozens of wireless remote cameras on the train tracks in order to do surveillance, determine schedules, and to plan for train derailments. They were tasked, according to the evidence and to their own confessions, they were tasked with derailing these trains. I am pleased to say, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody else, to this day, nearly 22 months into this war, not a single supply train from Poland has been hit, derailed, or taken out by the Russians. They have been completely unable to hit that logistics route. Let's hope it stays that way. We are having some trouble here in Europe. The far right is on the rise. There can be no doubt about it. And the far right in Slovakia, in Hungary, that wants to end aid to Ukraine, all have ties to Russia and the Kremlin and Russian money. And now a new party has risen to power in the Netherlands. The Dutch general elections were yesterday. The far right party tied to the Kremlin received the majority. Now, it's only 38 seats in a parliament of 150. So he's not going to get his way exclusively. He's going to have to form a coalition government. But still, should be deeply concerning to all of us that these power centers that have ties to the Kremlin, that take Kremlin money, that are in the Kremlin's pockets, are getting popular support, that these populist movements are gaining traction. It could be that that's why we saw the Netherlands announce its €2 billion package, because this guy is going to fight every dime, just like Mike Johnson is in the United States. Putin is said to be in Belarus for the Collective Security Treaty Organization meeting. The CSTO is like Dollar Tree NATO, right? It's Putin's version of NATO, and it is remarkably ineffective. You will note that none of the countries in it have come to Russia's defense or even to their support in the fight against Ukraine, with the exception of Belarus. Armenia is not attending. Now, they say that they are not interested in leaving the organization, but Armenia is consistently moving away from Moscow. They signed on to the ICC, which means Putin can never set foot in the country again. They have turned to the West and engaged in military exercises with the United States very recently. And they are disappointed, to say the least, in the loss of Nagorno-Karabakh. And they feel that the CSTO should have been there for them. And it wasn't, because the CSTO doesn't really exist to defend its member states. It exists to defend Russia. If you're having trouble, too bad. But if Russia needs you, you better show up. The Russian parliament has just approved its annual budget, and that budget dedicates 30% to defense, to the war effort, as opposed to, say, the United States, where we spend 16% of our budget on defense. And finally, in the general news, the Germans and the Italians have announced a new project, a pipeline project over the Alps to get gas, natural gas, from North Africa to Germany. And so as the world pivots away from Russian gas, we see a surge in an interest in North African gas for Europe. And this pipeline will funnel that gas to Germany. Now, the big story today, of course, is Putin's comments at the G20. And for anybody who didn't watch those comments or didn't see Putin's comments at the G20, I suffered through it so that you don't have to. And let's take a look at what this son of a bitch had to say. Now, the ISW has essentially called his comments a sham. They are a pack of lies designed to get the West to try to see Putin as a reasonable person and try to push, according to the ISW, try to push Ukraine to the negotiating table and look for settlement. That seems to be the goal of these comments. And if you believed them or thought they were reasonable, then yeah, maybe that would be a thing to do. But anybody paying attention you either have to laugh at the hypocrisy, at just the outright lies that this son of a bitch read so calmly, so collectedly, so forthrightly from his notes. The first thing, I mean, within 30 seconds of opening his mouth, he says, we must think about how to stop this tragedy. We must think about how to stop this tragedy. Hey, I have an idea. Why don't you pack your shit and go the fuck home? How about that? Let's start there, Vlad. He says that they have never refused peace talks. No, of course not. They've never refused peace talks. They simply said that peace talks must start with them keeping all the land they've taken and are currently occupying, which is a non-starter for Ukraine. Now, this was my favorite. He said the words, I understand this is a war. Now, at home in Russia, if you say that, you go to jail for 20 years. How come he gets to say it? Is anybody arresting him? Seems unlikely. He referred to the Day of Dignity, November 22nd, when the Maidan started here in Kyiv, as the bloody coup of 2014, followed by Kyiv's war against the Donbass. I mean, this is a delusion of such epic proportions. Sitting there to say such a thing when you know that you sent your troops in civilian clothes, that you sent Igor Girkin into the Donbass to form a separatist movement and militia, when you fomented a separatist war inside your peaceful neighbor's country for your own ambitions, just like you did in Transnistria, just like you did in Georgia, just like you did in Chechnya. Please, it's insanity of the worst sort. Now, after that, there was this rambling set of bullshit about Gaza that made no sense and didn't go anywhere. It looked like he was teeing up a whole bunch of whataboutisms, but it never resolved into anything, and then he went back on script. It was a curious divergence. This line is great. We require a collective consensus. The opinion of overwhelming majority of the international community is required. Russia stands alone in this war in violation of the UN Charter and the Geneva Convention. And yet he says this. It's unreal. He went on to blame the West for all of the problems of turbulence in the markets, increasing chronic problems in food security, the financial sector, and is down to him. He foments unrest abroad. He undermines the rules-based order and political norms. He funds separatist wars inside of otherwise peaceful nations. This is a man whose reign is defined by chaos. He assured Africa that the first Russian food shipments are on the way, and again, blame the West for any food insecurity that they are suffering, even though he just burned 500,000 tons of grain in Odessa and Mykolaiv and the Danube. Russia stands for the restoration of international economic cooperation based on the norms of the UN Charter. How does he say it with a straight face? How does he say this shit with a straight face? It's unbelievable. And the final comment that he made was that Russia is always working to give women more power in the economy. He says this after the Minister of Education just recommended that women be cut off from college education to have more babies. It must be quite a place to visit, Vladimir Putin's head. I wouldn't want to get lost in that maze. I'm going to end the YouTube stream. Thanks for checking it out on YouTube. Oh, I got somebody on YouTube today. Hey, thanks, pal. Thanks for stopping by.